That's okay.
So we'll start out with fertility issues, do end-of-life issues, and then euthanasia. Hopefully I have something there to at least support the church's rationales behind this. Remember, this is through natural law, but in light of divine revelation. So does anybody here know of a couple, could be your parents, brothers, sisters, or family, extended family, that have fertility issues? They had problems having children? It's tragic. I mean, it really is. I knew one couple that I didn't know them well, but I had some business with them. They were married. I think he was 25, she was probably 23, and they tried to have children from the first year of their marriage. He was 40 before they had a child. So, you know, the struggles that they went over, and the stress that it puts on your marriage, and the dashing of your own hopes, but then only followed by the absolute joy. So if you ask them, are children gifts? You know, it's absolutely, absolutely. So the desire for children, obviously it's cultural, but we're going to say that it develops within marriage based on natural inclination for procreation, right? In other words, remember I said that's one of our inclinations. We're built for this. So it's a natural inclination to procreate. Now, that being said, we do have fertility issues, and we want to be talking about this. Children are not property. Okay, so no parents, no mom or dad has a right to a child. We can't think in those terms. Now, maybe nobody's going to be so crass that they just say, I have a right to a child. But they might say, I deserve children. They might talk in language that, filters this way. But children are not property, okay? And the tragedy is that some people just simply are not going to have children. So let's not start out by saying it's a right. Now, the other end of this is like the child's perspective, right? In Dignitas Personae, we talked about that real briefly yesterday. It goes on to say that the human values of sexuality requires that the procreation is a result of, let's say, is a fruit of the conjugal act, a result or a fruit of the conjugal act. So the human values of sexuality require that the procreation is a result or a fruit of the conjugal act. What does that mean? That means that there is a distinction between a child who is brought into the world purposely and intentionally through the loving act of the conjugal love. That has meaning for the person. Now, how else can it happen? Accident, or we're getting old, I guess we should have children. We don't do it now. Or, violent acts like rape, okay? Now, the caveat that you should know is that it doesn't matter what the instance of how the person came into the world, the dignity does not change. It doesn't matter if it was a violent, horrific act or the most beautiful love between a man and a woman. The dignity remains the same. But that being said, let me repeat that. That being said, procreation should be the result of the fruit of the conjugal act. Now that's almost like a child's right. The child has the right to be brought in the world from the love of a mom and dad. Okay? And there's a lot of identity issues that we could talk about if we had more time. Psychologically that comes from that. Now look, since, you don't have to be religious to get that people that are struggling to have children need assistance sometimes, all right? And there's various reasons, and we're not going to be exhaustive here at all. You could have blocked fallopian tubes. You can have issues either with production of sperm or low sperm count, production of ovum. I mean, there's various issues. Or you can simply have some, abnormalities with the organs, all right? So there are all kinds of issues, probably physically, physiologically, psychologically, that can contribute to why a person's going to have difficulty with fertility. So recognizing that, though, we're not going to say everything is licit. In other words, you don't have a right to a child, and we're not consequentialists, so we can't use any means to get to a good end. These, and I'll briefly talk about them, then I'll talk about the issues behind them morally. We understand the intention is good here. Any parent that uses any means to bring a child into the world has a good intention. We concede that and we laud that, but we also don't determine the moral object of an act by its intention. It's what you're doing. Okay? So first of all, artificial insemination. It could be either from the sperm is collected from the father and or a donor, and then it's inseminated into the woman, in her cervical, the uterus, and hopefully vaginal cervical area, and then hopefully the natural process will go from there. The sperm will make its way up to the egg, and you'll have fertilization. In vitro fertilization will be where they will extract sperm from the husband and or a donor. They will hyper-ovulate, give medicine for the woman to hyper-ovulate. So although you could also have, eggs donated, and then the eggs and the sperm are brought together in a petri dish, and then they will choose the best of those, implant a few, possibly reduce them later. I'll talk about that, and then the woman basically becomes pregnant once the embryo implants. Tubal transfer, gametal tubal transfer, they could go up and mechanically bring the fertilized embryo down through the tubes and then assisted implantation. These are all illicit, or the church doesn't approve any of these. And the reasons, the major reason is it circumvents the sexual act. We'll talk about that at the bottom of the slide. But there are moral concerns that just ripple away from this, all right? You literally got to think about throwing a rock in the lake. That ripple goes all over. And this is, and books have been written on this. Law and Order has done episodes on this. I mean, there are so many ethical and legal dilemmas that come out of this. It's going to be hard for us to encapsulate them all. Let's just talk about, artificial insemination. We're just going to leave that because a lot of the same issues show up in IVF. Okay, first of all, how is the sperm collected? Typically through masturbation. It could be illicitly collected, what they call postcoital collection, but that's not the concern. The major concern is you're circumventing the sexual act. The woman is typically hyper-ovulated, so you are collecting, and I don't know specifically, but you're probably going to collect 3-6 eggs or so. And then you are going to fertilize these eggs in the petri dish. They are not going to implant them all right? Although that has happened. Octomom, you guys all heard of Octomom? Everybody was up, now you might have been too young when that was going through the news cycles, but you know what most people were upset about that? Is that who's going to take care of these kids? Okay, well, I get that's a concern. But the Catholic Church stepped in and said, no, listen, first of all, what she did was wrong, was IVF. But she wanted them all implanted because she couldn't conceive not having them all her children. She called them her children, and they all took. Okay?
So the church finds this immoral?
Absolutely. Yeah.
But wouldn't parents that are willing to spend all this money and time and energy on trying to conceive a child, even if they can't do it naturally, wouldn't you say that?
Situation ethics would.
Okay.
So would consequentialism, proportionalism.
So it's just the immoral part that it's an unnatural childbirth?
It's immoral because of all these things. Okay, first of all, you're circumventing the sexual act. That's the primary one. But now, let me say something. And get this. Here's how it normally works. We'll use a number. Let's say you have 7 eggs that were fertilized. They're not going to implant 7 eggs into the woman. They're going to probably implant 2 or 3. All right. So we see a higher incidence sometimes of multiple births because of this. Now, if let's say they implant 3, like I have articles, but I don't have time to go into them, but I'll describe them. And the mother doesn't want to have triplets, so they have a euphemism that's called selective reduction. So they wait till the babies get about 13, 15 weeks. And if I showed you the video, it's on YouTube, I'd have parents calling me. They go in with a needle, like they'll pick which fetus. So let's just say that they look in the ultrasound, it looks like you have 2 boys and a girl. Well, I'll just have one of each. So let's kill one of the boys. They'll go in with a needle into the heart and inject potassium. That's part of this process. All right, you can't get away from that. So their intention is great. We're not saying their intention isn't good. This process is illicit. Not only that, what do you do with the unused embryos? Well, they're cryogenically frozen. Now, what do we do with that? Now, I had actually had a paper published on that aspect of it. We don't know what to do with these. The Pope actually, John Paul II, called it an absurd fate. So what do is maybe you just leave them there. Or maybe you can donate them for research. Okay, well now we're talking about embryonic stem cell research. We're killing human persons. Oh, come on, they're just embryos. Okay, let's go back to ask, what is it? Okay, you can call it an embryo, but is it a human person? Well, I don't believe it's a person. Okay, when does it become a person? We have to work through that whole argument again. Then what happens? You guys know the divorce rate. So what do you do when mom and dad split? And mom gets remarried and dad gets remarried. Who owns those embryos? I mean, Law and Order did a specific, episode on this, just because it happens. There's legal issues. These things get put into wills and contracts. So mom's remarried with this guy, and dad's remarried to this girl. What if mom wants the embryos reimplanted? Now what do we do?
Why wouldn't it be her right?
Well, what about the dad? And then what about who is the father? And is there any responsibility? I had a video. Okay, we don't have the time. It was an Indian physician. So we're not even talking, and I mean like Hindi. We're not even talking Christian. And she was trying to explain all the ethical dilemmas that go on about this. And so it just ripples down the line. Do we leave them in a cryogenically frozen state? Do we then submit them for experimentation? Do they belong? Now we're talking property. Not just that, you can also get sperm from a sperm bank. You could choose the quality and characteristics of your children. I mean, we're calling this designer children. I know that's like a coined term, but it is the reality, okay? So do you see how far away you're getting from children as gifts and part of the love of a man or woman? Now, somebody's going to say, yeah, but they can't have kids. Children aren't a right. We have to keep that in mind. You don't have a right to a child, all right? They have to be the result of the gifts of the husband and the wife. So anyway, there's others, but that doesn't mean there isn't things available, okay? So anything that helps, any surgery, I mean, the Catholic Church says you do everything within licit means. Surgery, hormone or drug therapy. Natural family planning, again, if I had more time, I would show you a short video done by a non-Catholic institution, not even a religious institution, saying how the Catholic Church promotes this, but it's starting to pick up steam elsewhere. In other words, if you have issues with fertility and you went to a fertility clinic, they're not going to say, well, okay, we'll send you for an appointment and we'll do IVF. They're going to say, we need to find out what's going on. They are going to do what NFP does. They're going to have women and the dad, and when we do marriage and family and sexuality, I'm telling you, women are going to like this, because it brings the man into the woman's, for a woman, fertility is internal, for men, over there, right? So a woman, by measuring certain basal temperatures, various physical characteristics, you can determine exactly when you're ovulating. So what the fertility clinic was saying, we need to do that. So to increase your chances, let's have conjugal intercourse during the first fertile periods, right? Which is probably like 10 to 14 days or so after menstruation. Prior to menstruation, okay? So anyway, there are illicit ways to do it. But the reality in our fallen world is not every couple is going to have a child because they want one. And because they want one and desire one is not a right then. Those are artificial wombs that you see. They call them, decanters. It's in all likelihood, it's not a science fiction remark to say in your lifetime you'll see artificial wombs. We've come from 1978, the first test tube, as they called it, child. It won't be probably another 20 or 30 years. So, we talk in terms now as the woman's body, and she doesn't need the man. Which on some level, I don't know why more men aren't making the case that that's offensive. Right? So if somebody were to say, well, we don't need a man to have a child anymore. Really? At some point, I'm sorry, you do. Okay? We don't have artificial semen. So you do. So could you imagine if it was reversed? Like, let's say instead of having those technologies come first, that somebody would have developed an artificial womb first. You know, would a woman be offended by saying, we don't need you? We'll just get an egg at a donor's and we'll seminate it and place it in the artificial womb. I mean, so at some point, we have to, ask questions like they were saying, mother and father, if you read the book. Has anybody read this book? They're swear words. Well, that's not exactly true today, of course, but if I made the statement that a child should be the result of the love of a mother and a father, I guarantee people will find that offensive because it doesn't include them. Right? So we have something of that there. Also, you see the way they disconnected sex from procreation. So the way to get over feelings of guilt and such was by sleeping around. If you read the book, there are slogans throughout the book that the state uses, and one is promiscuity is a citizen's duty, because that's the only way they can separate the two.
What movie was that, or what book?
Brave New World by Aldous Huxley. And then he did a supplement, if you want to call it that, in the 60s called Brave New World Revisited, because some of the crap just came to realization. But it's absolutely, if you like dystopian novels, you like classics, it's a good one. Anyway, down here in Donum Vitae, this is the bottom line. And not just the bottom line on the slide, but the bottom line on the thinking. It is permissible to facilitate but not circumvent the sexual act. Okay? It is permissible to facilitate but not circumvent the sexual act. So anything that can be done to have the function of the act work, that's great. But you can't circumvent it. Now I understand you're able to, okay? But remember, ethics doesn't ask can you, it asks ought you, right? Let me just say something on the side real quick. Because somebody had asked earlier, and I'm going to talk about it in another time. People say, first of all, the Catholic Church is not opposed to birth control. They're opposed to contraception. Those are not the same thing. All contraception is birth control, and all birth control is contraception. Some people say, what if I'm on contraception for something else, right? Could be severe acne, could be hormonal imbalance, right, that causes depression. It could be cyst or such, and there's other things. If you know how to turn the moral object of an act, you are not on contraception. So let me give you a very specific scenario. Somebody who's been in therapy, right, suffering with some sort of, adjustment disorder or something, and then over the course of 16 months, the psychologist determines that there's a hormonal issue here. I see a cycle going on. I'm going to give you a prescription and send you to the OBGYN. They're going to give you the same packet that looks just like birth control, and it is birth control because they have no reason to call it anything other. But that is not, you're on hormonal therapy, even though you are taking what they are selling as birth control, okay? And it looks the same thing, it is the same thing. So it's a different moral object. Now, if you're on that, and you figure it's safe, hey, I'm on it for this, but you know what, I can't get pregnant, so I'm going to have sex, you've now changed the moral object. You now are on contraception, all right? So the church has no issues with using those hormones to treat other pathologies. That's what medicine is supposed to do, all right? So anyway, just something to say, because somebody had brought it up. Now, shock of life, we're all going to die. Human life is mortal. As obvious as that is, we often don't live that way, do we? And probably for reasons. So there have been ethicists that have come up with this term cult of health. Now, don't mistake that health is a good, and it needs to be preserved. But it's not the highest good. In other words, we don't preserve our health over all other things, particularly spiritual things. We would never have a United States if people thought health was the highest good. They never would have fought freedom. You would never heard things like, give me liberty or give me death, because that would have been absurd if health is the highest good. So what happens? We have people that take a good, eating well, and they take it to an obsession level. I mean, they could have programs developed, I'm not talking if you're, in other words, we have ordinary individuals that just work office jobs that are on regiments that, decathlons, athletes were doing back in the 70s. We have to ask ourselves, how much energy and effort are we spending into this? compulsive exercise, and unrealistic hope in the medical field. You know, medicine can't solve everything. It's an art. And it's medical health, it's not, you know, medical cures, all right? So even with all the advances, there's limits. So you have people that have an obsession with give me the pill rather than, you know, I'd probably fall in that. If there was a pill to help you lose weight and exercise, give it to me, you know, all right? But that's not how we're built. That's not our relationship with the nature. And most doctors, most that I've ever had, have said that too. We want you to have a quality of life that you live naturally, right? We don't want to try to put you on medicines that you don't need. So we have to just realize that there's this cult of health out there which gives us implicit understandings that somehow are the next thing I'm going to talk to you about, quality of life, you know, has various meanings. And I have a short little paragraph to show you on this. The problem with the term quality of life is that it really has uncertain meanings. I mean, what does it mean? And it's very subjective. What your quality of life is might be different than my quality of life. But it tends to view the human person. Yes?
What was the first one? Yeah.
In the medical field, right? Or medical practice. Uncertain meanings, it tends to view the human person in utility and cognition, right? In utility and cognition. Am I able to do what I want to do? And can I, you know, rationalize things out? Do I appear? So it's a very difficult term. So here is a Spanish philosopher who actually wrote a book on quality of life. Now, he distinguishes quality of life from dignity of life. And he says these are really two separate things. And he says, you know, first of all, it's become an instrument to deprive dignity of its meaning. Whereas we have a hard time talking about the dignity of the human person, we only think of dignity in terms of utility and cognition, how productive they are. We're worried about the environment. So, in other words, we live in a hedonistic society, it says, and we really look about our own capacity for enjoyment. Because hedonism is a pleasure, you know, orientation. So how much pleasure is life giving me? We start to look in those terms. This stuff might be subtle, but it all plays into it, right? So we have uncertain levels of quality of human life that's not worth living. So, you know, if you wonder, like we talked yesterday about Terry Schiavo, well, I wouldn't want to be like that. All right. But I think what you have to work out and sink in for yourselves is, where is the limit for you? Would it be if you lost mobility? Some people would think being in a wheelchair the rest of your life. I don't want to be like that. Some people might say, well, okay, I wouldn't mind that. But if I were a quadriplegic, I think that would be more than I could take. Well, what if I were a quadriplegic that was blind? I mean, you know, you're going to keep going down and figure out where exactly do you fit on that. And you're going to see that it's a very vague term. And it's a term entirely different from dignity of life, right? So we'll have to leave it there, but nonetheless. So what we're going to do here, I am determined to get through this with you guys. I know that's not a good teaching position just to get through it, but I have not been able to with the first two periods. We have to find a way to balance two extremes. Catholic health care concerns with end-of-life issues cannot be withholding care. But we also are not going to be proponents of these heroic measures to keep somebody alive at any cost. So what happens is that we're going to work off of a general obligation or principle. We're going to preserve human life and realize there's limits on that obligation. All right? So we work that out. So the two terms that ethicists use in bioethics are proportionate and disproportionate. Sometimes you will see ordinary and extraordinary. But they've moved away from that because the medical field has picked up those two words. And now ordinary care simply means what is normal or what's readily available. That is not the same meaning as proportionate, all right? So proportionate care means simply you have a reasonable hope of success. Whatever it is that you're trying to achieve, you have a reasonable hope of succeeding. And it's not too burdensome on the family or the person, all right? And that includes psychological, financial, all kinds of burdens. All those things get calculated. So a reasonable hope of success, not too burdensome on the individual or the family. And the disproportionate care is simply the reverse. It is no reasonable hope of success, and it's too burdensome on the family or the person, okay? So what you need to know about these two types is that proportionate care is always morally obligated for you to follow. If there's a reasonable hope of success in curing whatever malady you have or pathology, and it's not too burdensome, you must do it. Disproportionate care, I don't want to go through the chemo. The chances aren't the best. I'd rather live the rest of my life without worrying about being sick. You can do that. Or you don't have the money. I mean, not everybody has the money to get the care they need. You know, not everybody can run up to the top cancer center in, you know, the United States. Some people don't have access to that.
You aren't morally obligated to refuse disproportionate care, right?
You are not. You're not morally obligated. You know, you're not morally obligated to accept disproportionate care. You could refuse it, okay?
But we don't have to refuse it.
You don't have to. Well, but you could, though. I mean, don't slide into this. I mean, the heroic measures, you know, if you're using, you know, disproportionate amount of funds and energy, you know, again, why would the church say that? Well, for one, you don't need to. And the only people that are going to have access to that is the rich and powerful. I mean, they're the only ones. The people that don't have the money for that level of cancer treatment, it's not going to be an option for them. So, I mean, it's not obligatory. I didn't say that right. But anyway, so the last part of this is food and water. Okay, our ANH is artificial nutrition and hydration. They are never to be considered medicine, nor withdrawn. Food and water are not medicine. Okay? That's the basic right of any human person. You have access to food and water, even if it's artificially delivered. And that's in the case of Terry Schiavo, right? She wasn't on any support. She was simply had feeding tubes and IV, and those were withdrawn, and she starved to death over the course of 6 or 7 days. Now, there's a caveat to this. Okay, this is not an absolute, because if anybody here has been with anybody in their last 3 or 4 days, you stop eating. Okay, it gets to the point where this isn't going to do anything. You could withdraw it, as long as you don't hasten death. All right. It also could be that the person, for whatever reason, can't physiologically process it. If that's determined, well, you're not doing anything. Or, you know, these things have to be, you know, surgically inserted. Infections can arise. So if you get to the point where you're having a hard time controlling the infections, and this is going to cause more grief on this person, you're just delaying the inevitable, you can remove it, okay? But if all those other things are not the case under normal circumstances, it's unethical to remove ANH, okay? I know this is going fast, but I still think it's, like I said, it's better than a page in your textbook. Okay. Now, with euthanasia, I'll let you write the definition down. I'm hoping that you guys have at least learned that everything starts with the definition. So if you're having a discussion years ahead and somebody says, I'm for euthanasia, I'm against euthanasia, ask them what they mean. It's not always the same thing, all right? I mean, the word itself has to do with, like, you know, mercy killing. You often hear it said. Even the etymology of plays into that. But it's an action or omission which of itself or by intention causes death. And the last part of that is in order to alleviate suffering. Okay? So the intention here, absolutely good. If you want to alleviate suffering, how's that a bad thing? So we're not arguing the intention. Remember, the moral object is how we primarily determine an act, not by its intention. That stuff falls into, well, we can talk about situational ethics or deontology. Deontology wouldn't fall into this. They wouldn't probably do it. It depends on where they see their duty. But anyway, so there are various things. Let's walk through this. You can have voluntary euthanasia. If you voluntarily kill yourself, what do we call that? Suicide. So that's what voluntary euthanasia is. If it's involuntary, what do we call that? Like it's somebody doing it to you. Murder. If it's active, we're talking the person themselves are taking the pills, typically, right? Or injecting themselves, if that may be. Sometimes they make, like, like they have like things rigged up so the IV, everything's there, and the person simply has to open up the line. Or passive, that's where, you know, somebody's withdrawing treatment, like a doctor is withdrawing treatment on the individual, all right? So we are going to understand a distinction. Allowing someone to die is not the same as euthanasia. They're two different moral objects. Euthanasia is a bad object with a good intention. Allowing someone to die is a good object. This is inevitable. And your intention is simply you accept the finitude of life. All right? So they're different moral objects. Now what I have here, no notes, just a few screenshots to share with you what's going on in the world in the last 20, 30 years with euthanasia. So the New England Journal of Medicine in 1998 did a study of just under 2,000 physicians, asking them, 7% said they would provide a lethal injection, 36 and 24 respectively said they would do it if it were legal. Since entering practice, a little over 18% reported having received a request, and 11 for specifically for a lethal injection. 16% of physicians received requests, or 3.3 of the entire sample reported that they have already written at least one prescription to be used to hasten death. That would be, well, the individual, it would be active, all right? And 4.7% said that they had administered at least one lethal injection. That would be, you know, active. Could be voluntary or involuntary. If anybody is going into medicine and works in geriatric care, there's a lot of difficulties with this, you know, and a lot of uncertainties. You know, so before anybody kind of thinks this stuff never happens, you know, I think if you had more experience, like especially with geriatric care, you might at least be a little more apt to think, yeah, I can see this happening. Okay, the Netherlands. In the Netherlands, were, you know, where we're at now in the United States with our attitude toward euthanasia, they were like this back in the 60s and the 70s. So here you have case studies of here's what's going to happen, right? So people have done articles saying if you want to see the future of the United States, look to Netherlands for that. So 2,300 people had asked doctors to kill them. 400 asked doctors to provide them with the means to kill themselves. 8,100 died deliberately from an overdose. A little over 1,000 died when doctors euthanized them without their knowledge or consent. All right? So these are doctors that are making quality. See, when you start talking quality of life, you can't always think that it's going to be your view of quality of life that's going to be what governs the decision. It could be the doctor deciding that, or what burdens it are, right? And 72% said they never gave any indication they would want their lives terminated. That's pretty high. Almost 3/4 never even said they wanted anything done, yet it was done to them. All right. Now you might say, well, why isn't this prosecuted? They just don't. First of all, if you read the whole articles, they figure those numbers are doubled because none of this stuff really goes reported. Neonatologists now have developed in a Dutch infanticide protocol. So if we have newborn babies, they'll make some determination on, you know, the length and quality of their life, the level of handicap, and they have protocol for euthanizing newborns. Germany and Switzerland, they don't like the word euthanasia. It kind of reminds them of the Nazis. So they'll use assisted suicide. It's legal as long as the patient does it themselves unassisted. In the United States, we have 5 states that allow it, although the laws are slightly different. But nonetheless, I think somewhere it said, no, I guess it must have been another article, how many people are actually for it. All right. Now I apologize here. I'm just going to bring up these points. This way, at least, I won't quiz you guys on anything I don't say. But you're allowed to use therapy that may shorten a person's life, as long as your goal isn't to hasten it. I mean, consider giving somebody palliative care, and the drugs you're using might reduce their lifespan while they're in hospice. Well, that's okay. That's not your intention, and it might be the best thing for the individual to do. Yes?
Wouldn't that still hasten death?
No, as long as, it'd be a double effect. You realize that's what it's going to do. The person is in pain. You're trying to alleviate the pain. You realize while you're doing that, that might shorten the time that they're alive, but that's not your intention, nor is it the object there. In other words, the person probably would, you have to treat the pain. I mean, that's what it always comes down to. Living wills, the reason why they're not satisfactory is because they have to be by nature general, and you can't foresee every circumstance. You just can't. If you make a living will when you're 25, God, what are you going to do? I know even if you update it, but you can never keep up. And what are you going to do? Like, be like a medical geek and keep up on every last treatment that's available? So what the church says is use advanced directives, but in with a proxy. So have some healthcare proxy that can help the hospital interpret this is what they meant, okay? So what we do is at some point, I started out this thing by saying we're all going to die. We have to accept that. But for the secular world, that's the ultimate evil. If you research the history of the opposition to the death penalty, it comes from atheists in the 1800s, because that's the ultimate evil. What's worse than dying? For Christians, this is a mystery, but it's also entering to the next world. So the anxiety and fears that come from suffering and death, simply prolonging our years through the cult of health is not going to alleviate that anxiety. Technology cannot always fix what's in front of us. I'll get you in a sec. The last thing is, it's not easy being a Christian. In Matthew it says the gate is narrow and the way is hard. Take him for his word. We don't often do well. Michael.
How is using therapy that shortens life different than using evil for the sake of it?
Okay. Because what you're doing, if a person is in extreme pain and you're treating them for that pain, that's the object of what you're doing. You realize there's a double effect. So you're going to have to go through the four things. Is what I'm doing good? Yes, I'm treating them. Is what I'm doing, is the alleviation of the pain causing them to die? No. But the act that I'm doing doesn't have that effect. Yes. Is it proportional? You have to weigh it out and say, well, I think it is. Okay, because a person would come in and say, I'll put you out of your pain. Here, let me help shorten your life. See, intention, remember moral object and intention is part of the moral act. So if a person comes in and says, I'm going to help you, just so you understand that by me helping you, we could shorten your life. They'll say yes. If a person comes in and says, look, I'm just going to shorten your life and get this over with, that's two different intentions. I know that sounds like semantics. I'm sure that's what you're probably thinking, but
It's not even, I understand the